Drew, you promised. My voice cracked as I stared at the moving van unloading Edith and Harry's belongings. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. I'd spent months planning every detail of our new home, carefully designing it to accommodate my aging parents. Now, on what should have been the happiest day of our lives, I watched in horror as my in-laws' furniture was carried through the front door. Becca, honey, I can explain, Drew said, his voice low and pleading. He reached for my hand, but I jerked away. Explain what? How you went behind my back. How you betrayed everything we agreed on. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Edith appeared in the doorway, a smug smile playing on her lips. Oh, Rebecca dear, isn't this wonderful? We're all going to be one big happy family. I bit back a scathing retort, my eyes darting between Edith's self-satisfied expression and Drew's guilty face. This was supposed to be a sanctuary for my parents, a place where they could spend their golden years in comfort and dignity. Now, it felt like my dream was crumbling before my eyes. Drew, a word. Now. I grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the chaos of the moving crew and his parents' watchful gaze. Once we were out of earshot, I rounded on him. How could you do this? We talked about this for months. We agreed this house was for my parents. Drew's eyes couldn't meet mine. I know, Becca. But Mom and Dad, they need us too. They're not getting any younger, and dash. And what about my parents? I interrupted, my voice rising. What about our plans? Our promises. Before Drew could answer, I heard Edith's voice calling from inside the house. Andrew dear, where should we put the china cabinet? I watched as Drew's shoulders slumped, torn between his wife and his mother. In that moment, I realized this was more than just a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal, one that cut deep into the foundation of our marriage. As I stood there, watching my carefully laid plans unravel, I knew one thing for certain. This battle was far from over. My parents deserved this home, and I wasn't about to let Edith and Harry steal it from them without a fight. I paced the living room, my anger simmering as I watched Edith arrange her tacky knickknacks on our newly installed shelves. How dare she act like this was her home? Drew, I hissed, pulling him aside. We need to talk. Now. He followed me to the kitchen. His shoulders slumped. Becca, I know you're upset, but dash. Upset. I cut him off. I'm beyond upset, Drew. How could you do this? We agreed this house was for my parents. Drew ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting nervously. I know. But Mom and Dad, they really needed a place to stay. Their family too, Becca. And what about my family? I demanded, my voice rising. What about the promises we made to my parents? Before Drew could answer, Edith's voice floated in from the living room. Oh, Andrew dear, could you help your father with the bedroom furniture? I watched as Drew's face contorted with indecision. It was clear where his loyalty lay, and it wasn't with me. Go on, I said bitterly. Your mother's calling. As Drew shuffled out, I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect, about the foundation of our marriage. Suddenly, Harry appeared in the doorway, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. Rebecca, he began, his tone patronizing, I hope you understand that this is for the best. We're not getting any younger, and it's only right that our son takes care of us. I felt my temper flare. And what about my parents, Harry? They're not getting any younger either. He waved a dismissive hand. Oh, I'm sure they'll be fine. They can always visit, can't they? That was the last straw. I pushed past Harry, marching into the living room where Edith was still fussing with her decorations. This ends now, I declared, my voice trembling with anger. This house was built for my parents, and that's who's going to live here. Edith turned, her eyes narrowing. Now, Rebecca, don't be hasty. We're all family here. Family? I laughed bitterly. Family doesn't go behind each other's backs. Family doesn't manipulate and scheme. Drew appeared, looking panicked. Becca, please, let's talk about this calmly. But I was done being calm. As I looked around at the faces of my husband and in-laws, I realized with startling clarity that this was a battle I'd have to fight alone. And fight I would. If you won't stand up for what's right, I said to Drew, my voice steely with resolve, then I will. This is my house, and I decide who stays here. The silence that followed was deafening. I knew in that moment that the real war had just begun. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as Drew snored softly beside me. At dawn, I crept downstairs, desperate for a moment of peace. Instead, I found Edith in the kitchen, humming as she brewed coffee. "Oh, Rebecca dear," she cooed, her smile sickeningly sweet. "I hope we didn't wake you." I gritted my teeth. "Edie, you knew this was our plan all along." Her smile didn't falter. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Cut the act," I snapped. "You've been manipulating Drew for months, haven't you?" Edith's eyes narrowed. "Now, Rebecca, that's a serious accusation." Andrew simply realized where his priorities should lie. His priorities? I laughed bitterly. "You mean your priorities?" Just then, Drew stumbled into the kitchen bleary-eyed. "What's going on? Your wife seems to think I've been manipulating you," Edith said, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. Drew looked between us, confusion etched on his face. "Becca, what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. "Drew, think about it. All those phone calls from your mother, all those casual comments about how much they needed help. It wasn't coincidence." "That's ridiculous," Drew scoffed, but I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Edith placed a hand on Drew's arm. "Sweetheart, you know I'd never do such a thing. Your wife is just upset about sharing her new home." "Sharing?" I exploded. "This isn't sharing, Edie. This is a takeover." Drew held up his hands. "Becca, please. Let's not fight." But I was done being placated. "No, Drew. It's time you saw what's really going on here." I stormed to the guest room, returning with a stack of papers I'd found while unpacking. "Look at these," I said, thrusting them at Drew. "Your mother's been planning this move for months. She even has a list of ways to convince you to let them stay." Drew's face paled as he scanned the papers. Edith's smile finally faltered. "Mom." Drew's voice was small, uncertain. "Is this true?" Edith's mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of anger. "Andrew, you know we only want what's best for you." "What's best for him?" I laughed incredulously. "Or what's best for you?" The tension in the room was palpable. Drew looked lost, torn between his wife and his mother. Edith's eyes darted between us, calculating her next move. I stood my ground, heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Would Drew finally see through his mother's manipulations? As the silence stretched on, I realized with a sinking heart that this battle was far from over. But I was ready to fight, no matter the cost. Days passed, and the tension in our house grew thicker than the summer heat. Drew had retreated into himself, barely speaking to anyone. I watched helplessly as Edith and Harry settled in, rearranging furniture and hanging their photos on our walls. One evening, I found Drew in our bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. "Drew," I said softly, "we need to talk about this." He turned to me, his eyes hollow. "What's there to talk about, Becca? They're here now. You're choosing them over me, Drew. Over us." My voice trembled with a mix of hurt and anger. "Don't you see what this is doing to our marriage?" Drew sighed heavily. "They're my parents, Becca. What am I supposed to do? Stand up for us?" I cried. "For the life we planned together." But Drew just shook his head and left the room, leaving me alone with my frustration and despair. The next morning, I overheard Edith on the phone in the kitchen. "Yes, we're all moved in," she was saying. "No, Rebecca's parents won't be joining us. We made sure of that." My blood ran cold. I'd suspected Edith had been manipulating things, but hearing her admit it so casually was like a punch to the gut. I confronted her immediately. "What do you mean you made sure of that?" Edith's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "Eavesdropping is rude, Rebecca." "Don't change the subject," I snapped. "What did you do?" She smiled, cold and triumphant. "I simply reminded Andrew of his duties to his own family. Your parents have other children to care for them." I felt sick. "You had no right, Dash." "I had every right," Edith interrupted. "This is our son's home, and we belong here." I stormed out of the kitchen, my mind reeling. How could Drew have let this happen? How could he stand by while his parents systematically destroyed our plans, our future? That night, I lay awake, listening to Drew's steady breathing beside me. I realized with a sinking heart that he wasn't going to change, wasn't going to stand up to his parents. As the first light of dawn crept through our window, I made a decision. If Drew wouldn't fight for our life together, then I would have to do it myself, no matter the cost. I slipped out of bed, determination stealing my resolve. It was time to take matters into my own hands. My parents deserved this home, and I wasn't about to let Edith and Harry steal it from them without a fight. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, but there was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen in weeks. I nodded at her, a silent pact. This ends now, I thought. One way or another. I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I gripped the counter. The sound of Edith's laughter drifted in from the living room, mingling with the clink of teacups. It was as if she was mocking me in my own home. Drew shuffled in, his eyes downcast. Becca, can we talk? I whirled to face him. Now you want to talk? After weeks of silence. He flinched at my tone. I know I've been distant, but we need to figure this out. Figure what out, Drew? I snapped. How your parents have taken over our lives. How you've let them destroy everything we planned. Drew's face crumpled. They're my parents, Becca. I can't just throw them out. And what about my parents? I demanded. What about the promises we made to them? Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. Finally, I took a deep breath. If you won't tell them to leave, I will. Drew's eyes widened. Becca, you can't dash. I can and I will, I declared, my voice steely with resolve. This ends now, Drew. Either they go, or I do. The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and final. Drew's face paled as the weight of my words sank in. You don't mean that, he whispered. I've never meant anything more in my life, I replied, my heart pounding. It's time to choose, Drew. Your parents or our marriage. Just then, Edith's voice called from the living room. Andrew, dear, could you come help your father with something? I watched as Drew's shoulders slumped, torn between his wife and his mother. In that moment, I saw our future crumbling before my eyes. Go on, I said bitterly. Your mother's calling. As Drew hesitated, then turned to leave, I felt something inside me snap. This was it, the moment of truth. I couldn't wait for Drew to find his backbone anymore. It was time to take matters into my own hands. I strode past Drew, my mind made up. I was going to confront Edith and Harry directly. No more tiptoeing around, no more silent resentment. This was my home, and I was going to fight for it. As I entered the living room, Edith looked up, her smile faltering at the determination in my eyes. Edith, Harry, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We need to talk. Now. The tension in the room was palpable as Drew trailed in behind me, his face a mask of apprehension. This was the point of no return, and we all knew it. Whatever happened next would change everything. This is my house, and you will leave, I declared, my voice echoing with finality as I faced Edith and Harry. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Edith's eyes narrowed, her smile vanishing. Rebecca, dear, I think you're forgetting whose son owns this house. No, Edith, I shot back. I think you're forgetting whose name is on the deed. Drew and I built this home together, for my parents. Harry stood up, his face reddening. Now see here, young lady Dash. No, you see here, I interrupted, my patience snapping like a frayed rope. You've manipulated and schemed your way into our lives, and I've had enough. Drew stepped forward, his face pale. Becca, please, Dash. Don't Becca please me, I snapped. Where was your concern when they were moving in? When they were taking over our lives? Edith's voice turned cold. Andrew, are you going to let her speak to us this way? I watched Drew's face, saw the conflict warring in his eyes, but his silence spoke volumes. That's it, I said, my resolve hardening. I want you out. Now. Harry's face contorted with rage. You can't throw us out. This is our son's home. It's my home, I corrected, and I absolutely can. Suddenly, Edith lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You ungrateful little Dash. I jerked away, but she held on, her nails digging into my skin. In the chaos that followed, I heard Drew shouting, felt Harry's hand on my shoulder trying to pull me back. Let go of me, I yelled, struggling against their grip. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd been pushed too far for too long. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I wrenched free, sending Edith stumbling backward. Enough, I roared, my voice raw with emotion. I've had enough of your entitlement, your manipulation, your disrespect. This ends now. The room fell silent, everyone frozen in shock at my outburst. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at the faces of the people who had turned my life upside down. Drew looked at me, then at his parents, indecision written across his features. But I was done waiting for him to choose. I'm calling the police, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'll have you removed. As I turned to leave the room, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger than I'd ever felt, her eyes blazing with determination. This was the moment everything changed, and I was ready for it. You leave me no choice, I said, my heart pounding as I reached for my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed Sarah, my closest friend and a lawyer. The room fell silent, all eyes on me as I waited for her to answer. Sarah, I need your help, I said, my voice cracking. It's an emergency. As I explained the situation, I watched the color drain from Drew's face. Edith and Harry exchanged worried glances, their earlier bravado faltering. Within 30 minutes, Sarah arrived, her presence bringing a sense of calm to the chaos. She took one look at the scene, the scattered belongings, the tension thick in the air, and nodded grimly.
Edith, Harry, she said, her voice professional and firm. I'm here as Rebecca's legal representative. You have no legal right to be here, and if you don't leave voluntarily, we'll be forced to involve the authorities. Harry puffed up, ready to argue, but Edith placed a restraining hand on his arm. She knew they were cornered. Andrew, Edith pleaded, turning to Drew. You can't let this happen. We're your parents. I held my breath, watching Drew. This was it, the moment of truth. Would he finally stand up to them, or would he crumble under their manipulation once again? Drew looked at his parents, then at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the years of guilt and obligation warring with the love he claimed to have for me. Finally, he spoke. Mom, Dad, he said softly, it's time for you to go. The silence that followed was deafening. Edith's face crumpled, while Harry's reddened with rage. But I felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. As Sarah supervised Edith and Harry's hasty packing, I retreated to the kitchen, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through me. Drew followed, his steps hesitant. Becca, he started, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry. I should have. I pulled away, the hurt and betrayal of the past weeks still raw. Don't, Drew. It's too late. His face fell, the reality of what he'd done and what he'd almost lost finally sinking in. Can we fix this? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. The man I'd loved, the future we'd planned, it all seemed so distant now. I don't know, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I honestly don't know. As I heard the front door close behind Edith and Harry, a strange mix of relief and sorrow filled me. We'd won the battle, but at what cost? The home we'd built, the life we'd planned, it all lay in ruins around us. I turned away from Drew, staring out the window at the life we'd once dreamed of. The future stretched before me, uncertain and daunting. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. I never thought it would come to this, I said quietly, looking at my parents with a mixture of relief and sorrow. They stood in the doorway of their new room, suitcases at their feet, their faces etched with concern and love. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation with Edith and Harry. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, tearful conversations, and painful realizations. Drew and I had tried counseling, but the trust between us was shattered beyond repair. Yesterday, I had signed the separation papers. Sweetie, my mom said, stepping forward to embrace me. Are you sure about this? I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. I am, Mom. This house was always meant for you and Dad. It's time we made that a reality. As we unpacked their belongings, filling the rooms with familiar scents and cherished memories, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, just the three of us, I looked at my parents and saw not just the people who had raised me, but two individuals who had weathered life's storms together. Their love, their partnership, was everything I had once hoped to have with Drew. "I'm sorry it didn't work out with Drew," my dad said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But I want you to know how proud we are of you, Becca. You stood up for what was right, for what you believed in." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without your support." As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I found myself rediscovering parts of me that had been lost in the chaos of my marriage. I threw myself into my work, started volunteering at the local community center, and even took up painting, something I hadn't done since college. One crisp autumn morning, as I sat on the porch watching the sunrise, my mom joined me, two steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. "You seem different," she observed, handing me a mug. "Stronger?" I smiled, realizing she was right. "I am stronger," I replied. "I've learned that sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that lead us to where we're meant to be." As we sat in comfortable silence, watching the world awaken, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This house, once a symbol of shattered dreams, had become a sanctuary of healing and new beginnings. I had lost a husband, but I had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that I could weather any storm, face any challenge, and come out stronger on the other side. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.